Let's talk about some of those specific business crimes. First one, fraud, right? It has to be a scheme to defraud. So, again, the intent thing comes back in, and did you scheme? Businesses sometimes mislead, but they don't really have an intent to, screw their customers royally type of thing. But again, it may be a civil action, but for it to become a criminal action, there has to really be that intent. Okay. It can be a misstatement of facts. You have to, the public, the consumers have to justifiably rely on that information. It has to cause injury, and too, there does have to be some injury. Other types of fraud can be mail and wire fraud. A lot of times these get mixed together, I guess. In other words, you could have securities fraud that's committed through email would be considered this, or electronic now, has replaced a lot of the normal old-fashioned snail mail, right? And then wire, used to be a lot of wiring, but there still is money that gets wired from one place to another. And those types of fraudulent activities now probably taking place more in cyberspace. Okay, securities fraud, dealing with stocks, bonds, those types of things, and probably there's been more of that. Insider trading allegations, fraudulent allegations. The Enron thing where you're, pumping up, lying about your stock and profiting from it. Those types of things have been pretty pervasive here lately, or at least the ones that we see in the news. Healthcare fraud, charging insurers or the government, Medicaid, Medicare, inappropriately. And you'll see, I don't see those quite as often. Oftentimes it's big cases. You might even see a hospital, that's been engaging in that, or individual docs, or whatever the case may be. Counterfeiting, Haber had a while back in the newspaper, several articles about some counterfeit bills that were being passed around town, and to be on the lookout. And so, those things obviously happen. And then bankruptcy fraud, and saw this, a couple times. Never saw it get prosecuted really, but bankruptcy fraud might be, for example, hiding assets. Quite simply, let's say you had a business that took in a lot of cash, and you hid the cash, and then you filed the business filed bankruptcy. Okay, it goes through the bankruptcy, it gets exonerated from debt, and then the person goes to the safe deposit box and pulls out the cash and lives the good life. That would be a bankruptcy fraud, and obviously illegal. More specifically about mail and wire fraud, does have to be interstate communication, which again is pretty broadly defined. It has to be a scheme. So again, intent, legal aspects, statement, material, right? Things that are, I guess we would assume, for most crimes, exist for mail and wire fraud too, and the consumer has to justifiably rely or figure that you're acting in good faith. So conspiracy is just more than one. Okay, so you might have a couple of people. The disaster that just happened, I think it was in Michigan, where kids were throwing rocks off the overpass, and one went through a windshield and killed an unfortunate person. One threw the rock, right? But the others conspired. Okay. And in business, it might be the bookkeeper and the, person from the mailroom or something that could conspire, right? Just more than one person, okay? Each member, though, does have to be a willful member. So if it's a, boss, officer exerting some undue influence over somebody, lower in the food chain, may not be, that person may not be then guilty of conspiracy. And they have to commit an overt act. They don't need to know the details of their act or what it does, but it has to be an overt act. Again, having knowledge going in that it's illegal and doing it nonetheless. Okay. Obstruction of justice. That's what I said Martha Stewart got. Okay. Act committed with intent. Okay. Again, intent comes up again, right? In Martha's case, right, she was accused of insider trading. She had received some information via an email from, let's say you're a stockbroker, okay, and the stockbroker had some inside information, okay, we think, and so they went after Martha for insider trading, and she refused to produce the documents. She refused to produce the paper trail. And so as a result, they had a difficult time proving insider trading, but what they proved then was that she obstructed justice. She did not produce the documents that she was required to produce, and that's an obstruction. And so that's what she actually spent the time for. It's probably a, guess or a gamble on her part that the penalty for the obstruction would be less than the penalty for the insider trading claim. So other things, that can happen, right? Shredding documents, changing records. Okay. False statement. Banks are federally protected. If you make a false statement to a bank, fill out a falsified, financial statement application, okay, lie about your income, lie about your job, those types of things, that's actually a federal offense. Okay. I know I had one customer in the FBI, the loan went bad and we'd write it off, and the examiners came in and looked at it and said, well, did you call the FBI? And I said, well, no, it wasn't that big of a loan. And I said, well, you need to. So I called the FBI, and sure enough, they contacted the person, contacted some of the relatives and whatnot, and some of the folks in the area. I don't think they ever prosecuted the person, but I'm sure it woke the person up, and they probably didn't participate in things like that too much anymore, I would hope. So, because the person had falsified a statement, number one, and number two, it actually signed a statement on behalf of somebody else. So, yeah. So, willfully and knowingly relate to material matter. Exculpatory, no, meaning you can't, you can't, like we said with exculpatory earlier, is you can't go in saying, hey, I'm not going to be responsible for this. Okay, you can't do that ahead of time with these types of crimes. Larceny is just taking, right? We're kind of familiar with that. Stealing, right? Robbery, burglary, embezzlement. We see a decent amount. We've seen lately. I think there was a case here in Havre just recently that was in the news. Can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe less in the news are these types of things: use of company property without permission. Okay. Now, again, the huge gray areas, right? If I'm sitting at my desk, either here or, of course, my calculator's my own, but let's say at the bank, and the calculator actually belonged to the bank, but I calculated something for myself. Is that a use of company property without permission? Now, maybe technically yes, but it's so minor, okay? And maybe technically no, because there's nothing that prohibits that either, right? But on the other hand, if I took the company vehicle for a joyride someplace, yeah, that's probably not considered right. Okay, probably not correct. Padding expense accounts, lying about it. How tough would it be to put on there, you and your wife go to dinner and you say it was a customer, okay, and you turn it in. That'd be padding expense accounts. Okay, falsifying time records, saying that you're working longer than you actually did. RICO, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but we won't get into. I think this can get to be a little bit confusing. But RICO came about back in the old mafia days, and what happened in order to protect themselves, mafia dons or the leaders, instead of actually being involved in the criminal activities themselves, what they might do is own properties or something, and then charge rent, okay? And so their underlings would go out and actually participate in the illegal doings, and then they would pay rent to the mafia dons. And obviously it was a protection. There was a layer there that made it difficult to get after the dons, and so a law was passed that said RICO, right? So if you acquire or maintain an interest in a prohibited enterprise, if you use money, okay, or invest income from prohibited activities. So it kind of, if it made it so that if the law enforcement could draw that connection, then they could go after those other people. If they knowingly accepted money, like rents or whatever, from the underlings, then they could go after them, okay? And prohibited activity, pattern of racketeering, and that's what DAR is, racketeering, inspired, corrupt practices, something, or corrupt organization. I can't remember what RICO totally stands for, but and collection of unlawful debts. So, if you go back again to the mafia times, it's been expanded, and it's not just the mafia. Obviously, they use RICO for other business related things, because some of those same practices might be used by a business. Cybercrime, kind of a new thing, right? But new as in the last 20 or so years. Hacker, right? Those folks that are hacking into Equifax and those places, okay, committing ID theft in those cases, right? But they might also go after trade secrets, personnel records, different things like that. Of course, those are all illegal. Endangering workers, right? Could be assault and battery, right? If just a direct threat maybe, but accidental homicide, not providing the right protections, not providing the right safety precautions, those types of things could be endangerment, worker endangerment that could lead to criminal, and sometimes civil. What happens if you got the protections in place and the worker refuses to use those? And again, they're gray areas. So was there intent, in a case like that by the company? Probably not, to harm the person. And was there an intent? Did you just miss putting up a railing? Whatever the case might be, proving intent again can sometimes be difficult. I think when they were building the malt plant down in Great Falls, one or two guys actually fell, off some scaffolding. And I know the company, to my knowledge, none of the company executives or anything were accused of crime, and to my knowledge, neither was the company itself. But it did pay a fine, and I'm sure paid out to the families. Probably for not having the proper safety procedures in place. So, aiding and abetting, helping somebody. You might not rob the bank, but if you drive the car, right, you've aided and abetted in a criminal act. And so, even in a business sense, again, what if you're the guy falsifying the documents? You might not be profiting from it. You might not be doing, gaining from it. But if you're actually participating in it, you could certainly be considered to be aiding and abetting. Okay, and that can be before the crime, certainly, or after the crime. After the crime is giving the ride. Okay, you have to knowingly, again, if you pick up a hitchhiker and give him a ride, and it turns out he robbed a bank in a town, 20 miles back, and you didn't know about it when you picked him up, that's not a crime. Okay, but if you knowingly give him a ride, knowing that he had committed the crime, then that is in itself a crime. Montana, this is what I found in the Montana Code Annotated, is that I think it's referred to as accountability. And the words aid and abet are right in this, right here. Right? Either before or during the commission of an offense with the purpose to promote or facilitate such commission, he solicits aids and abets. Excuse me. I think this is the same thing basically as aiding and abetting, and it's just what we call it here in the state of Montana. Might be on the test. So bribery, kickbacks. Oh man, isn't that what we're seeing? Well, that's what they've opened up some investigations into Clinton's uranium deal, Clinton/Obama's uranium deal, that there might have been some bribery and kickbacks there from Russian companies or Russia itself trying to gain access to uranium here in the U.S. And so, yeah, that may become a bigger deal going forward. That's a public official, right? So that would be a federal charge, okay? But there's bribery on local. If you gave a banker $100 under the table so that he or she made you a loan, that's bribery and it's illegal, okay? And things like that, even on a smaller scale, are just as illegal as a bigger scale, okay? Fixing a college or professional sporting event. Pete Rose has been banned. There's no knowledge that he actually fixed any of those things, but he was banned because he participated in betting, right? Okay, but certainly you can't fix. Go back if you want to read about the big case. You read about the 1918 Chicago. They were the White Sox, but they've been termed the Black Sox because they threw the World Series. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. I think there's a movie called 8 Men Out or something like that is about that. So, and hey, we saw this, giving money back to someone who made a decision that benefited you or your company. We saw this just recently, with Rocky Boy Water Project. Contracts were given out to certain companies, and those companies then gave some money back to the individuals who had given the contract. Kickbacks. Yeah. We saw that big time. That was in the news big time, and there's still people in jail as a result of that. So, all right. So what kind of trends do we see? We see Sarbanes-Oxley, and we talk about that by itself, I think, in a later chapter, so I won't go into any length on that. But that has to do with publicly traded companies. Prosecution for tax evasion. If you go back to the famous Al Capone, they couldn't pin a lot of things on him. That might have been before the RICO Acts and stuff, but they got him for tax evasion. That's what he ultimately spent some time in jail for. And so, that still happens, obviously. They find out that some people profited from stuff, and while they might not be able to prove the crime, they can check and see if they actually filed taxes, paid taxes on it. So you're seeing a lot of plea bargain, right? Trying to get lower level people to testify against upper level people. Seizure of assets. This one, I'll tell you what, if you want to have maybe a little bit of fun, look up. There's some really interesting cases about seizures of assets prior to people even being convicted of a crime. In other words, they're just suspected of being in a crime. And a lot of times it has to do with cash transactions and on and on. And there's some really mind-boggling cases that would cause you some great concern, where the government has actually seized assets of small businesses because they thought that they were involved maybe in criminal activities, when in actuality they absolutely were not, and yet those companies played hell trying to get their cash back. And so if you did a little Google search or Bing search, you'd find that probably easily. So might be interesting, be a good discussion topic. So that's it for chapter 13, so enjoy.